In 1793, an inventor named Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. This invention was made to lower the amount of man-hours required to separate the cotton seed from the raw cotton fibers. This industrialized the North, while the South was very agricultural. Now the United States was divided by its economy as well. In the South Side, Abraham Lincoln was a threat to them. He was such a threat, they kept his name off the ballot. To the North, Lincoln was someone who could save the Union. When Lincoln became president, South Carolina seceded the Union. The Union was now falling apart, but Lincoln was determined to save it. After Lincoln was elected, South Carolina left the Union to save slavery. Many other states followed. They called their new nation the Confederate States of America. This was the final straw. A war was approaching. This battle was fought in Virginia, just miles from Washington, D.C., on June 21, 1861. A 35,000-strong Union force, led by General Irvin McDowell, headed towards Confederate Northern Virginia. They crossed the bridge at 6 a.m., but attacked at 1 p.m. By 4 p.m., the Unionists were worn out and became very disorganized. By the end of the battle, 3,000 Union troops died, and nearly 2,000 Confederate troops were killed. This boosted the spirits of the Confederate Army. In May and June 1863, General Ulysses S. Grant's army met in Vicksburg, trapping the Confederate Army under General John Pemberton. On July 4th, Vicksburg surrendered. This strategy was one of the most brilliant of the war. Because of this battle, the Confederacy was split in half. Grant's accomplishment led to him becoming General-in-Chief of the Union armies. On July 1st, the Confederate Army pushed back the Union defenders to the streets of Cemetery Hill. During that night, reinforcements came to assist both sides. Lee, the Confederate leader, attempted to surround first, striking at Peach Orchard, Wheatfield, Devil's Den, and the Round Tops, with Longstreet's and Hill's divisions then attacking the Union. The next morning, the Confederate Army were driven away. In the afternoon, Lee attacked the Union's center on Cemetery Ridge. On July 21st, Lee began withdrawing his army. His train of wounded stretched more than 14 miles. This was a great Union victory. Following the Battle of Peachtree Creek, General Hood of the Confederate Army was determined to attack General James B. McPherson's army from Tennessee. He withdrew his main army at night from Atlanta's outer line to the inner line, tempting Sherman to follow. In the meantime, he sent William J. Hardee with his corps on a 15-mile march to the unprotected Union left and rear east of the city. They were supposed to fight together, but Hood miscalculated the time it would take to march, so he couldn't fight until the afternoon. A little while later, a Confederate soldier shot and killed McPherson when he rode out to observe the fighting. Determined attacks continued, which destroyed the area, but Union forces held for another victory. Most of the time, soldiers weren't fighting but drilling on battle techniques. The rest of the time, they had to fight boredom. With limited communication, they usually gambled and played games such as cards and dominoes. While the men were at war, the women were left to take care of the house and the children. In the North, women would take care of their daily tasks, but when they had free time, they would choose to make uniforms and bandages, along with food baskets to send to the soldiers. Not very many women had to replace their husbands at work because of the large population. That all changed after the first battle in Richmond, Virginia. Women were now allowed to work because they had no husband or children to take care of. At the beginning of the war, women weren't allowed to be nurses, but doctors began to let them because they were desperately needed. One well-known nurse was a woman named Clara Barton. She didn't care if the person was black or white, man or woman. She just wanted to help. She became important to the war because she did not segregate the wounded or dying. In the South, it was a lot different. While the men were at war, women took over most of the jobs. Since most of the battles were fought in the South, women didn't want to work in factories and buildings because soldiers burned them during the war. With shortages of food and clothing, women made clothes out of old sheets and curtains. Women could still work in hospitals like in the North. However, the women in the South took wounded soldiers into their homes even though they had little to give them. With most of the slave owners gone off to war, women and less experienced slave owners were left to own the slaves. With less supervision, many slaves escaped to the North. Many of those slaves became soldiers for the Union Army. On April 9th, the remnants of John Brown Gordon's Corps and Fitzhugh Lee's cavalry formed a line of battle at Appomattox Courthouse. General Lee was determined at one last attempt to escape the closing Union pincers and reach supplies at Lynchburg. At dawn, the Confederates gained ground against the Unionists. However, the arrival of the Unionists stopped and surrounded Lee's army. Lee surrendered to Grant. This was the final engagement of the war in Virginia. Because most of the battles were fought in the South, the Civil War almost completely destroyed the South. 360,000 Union troops were killed and 260,000 Confederate troops were killed. Most of the deaths were caused by illness rather than in battle. Because of the Union victory, all the slaves were freed from their owners. Some of them chose to move to the North and start a family, and some stayed in the South, often taking their master's position on the plantation.
So, Albert, why did you want to join the Army?
Well, when I was a young boy, my dad was killed by his wounds from the Battle of Shiloh.
What was your occupation during the Civil War?
I was a drummer boy.
What exactly was the purpose of a drummer boy?
Well, the troops were fighting. The sounds of the drum were a way on communicating on what to do next. For example, retreat, fire, go to. It was an excellent way of communication.
How do you feel about being the last Civil War veteran?
It is pretty cool, but I don't think of it very much because it is just my life.
Did you work with Northerners or Southerners?
I'm from the North. However, I did treat both sides. There were hospitals that would only admit one side. Personally, I believe that it's your job to treat the injured, then you should look at the patient, not the uniform.
On average, how many people do you think you cared for each day?
Oh, I don't know. One day there would be hundreds, and other days there wouldn't be very many. We use those days to prepare for the next round.
What type of injury did you see the most?
There were many more sick people than injured. During the war, more people died of illnesses rather than being injured in battle.
This program is brought to you by Ward's Perfect Fitting Shirts, Schuyler, Hartley & Graham Military Goods, and by Baloo's French Yoke Shirts.